Hello and welcome to One Trek Mind with me, Michael.
And me, Raptor.
And today we're going to be discussing the 9th episode of Season 3 for Strange New Worlds, Terrarium.
And we're going to try something a little bit different with this episode, just on a sort of testing something out. So, we'll see how that goes. I'm going to go off the bat and say I thought this episode was really, really good.
Until
then it fumbled the ending.
I completely agree with that.
So, the episode starts with a very simple premise. The Enterprise is heading into completely uncharted space in order to do some exploration work and drop essentially a spy satellite. Just before they then also have to go and deliver a vaccine for 4,000 colonists, otherwise they'll die. Who thought that was a good idea? Like, we're going to send you to plot out this really hyper dangerous place in space we know nothing about, and then afterwards can you go and deliver these vaccines?
Yeah, it didn't seem like the schedule planner in that particular case was doing their jobs very well. That definitely seemed like a job for two separate ships. Like, this ship goes and scans that, this ship goes and delivers the vaccine. But I'm sure standard Star Trek fare, they're like, well, you're the only ship close enough
only
to
ship
either
in the
of
area.
those things. So we have hundreds of ships out there, but you're the only one who's close enough to do both of these things.
I also thought there was an opportunity here to mention, the Expanse from Enterprise, and that the NX-01 had been in an era of space similar, and they didn't mention it at all. It was like everyone, like Spock and everyone, just had never heard of similar sorts of areas of space.
It didn't seem like they were, unfamiliar with those things. They just never really brought it up, which, I don't know, it didn't really bother me. I was just kind of
I just thought it was... I thought it would be... They missed an opportunity there to sort of name drop Enterprise. And, I always like it when the newer shows do at least refer to the fact that that show did exist.
There was a shot later on. You see the NX-01 in the back of the... What is it called? The ready room?
The conference room, yeah.
Conference
room.
But
that's always there, isn't it? But...
Yeah, but it just, I don't know, for some reason it stood out to me in this episode. I was like, hey, there it is.
But yeah, so Ortegas is going to fly the shuttle on her own, which also seems to be questionable.
I mean, they give the explanation of, every extra bit of weight counts in this scenario, so we can only send one person to do it, which, I mean, it's not the best explanation for her being on her own, but I'll take it. It's not like an offensively stupid reason or anything. I'm like, sure, why not?
And rather inevitably, everything goes wrong. A wormhole suddenly appears, completely unexpected to her and the Enterprise, swallows the shuttlecraft she's in, and she crash lands on a moon orbiting a very large gas giant, God knows wherever else. The crash landing destroys her emergency rations, leaving her without food or water.
Can I say that's got to be the most inconvenient small fire I've ever seen? Like, the only thing that got set on fire were your rations. I'm like, that's just bad luck right there.
Well, I suspect that it was all part of what we'll get to with the ending.
Oh, probably. You're probably right about that.
But yes, the very convenient fire destroys all the rations, but she works to create a water condenser from parts in the shuttlecraft to get fresh water, but the planet itself looks to be pretty uninhabitable, so the chances of getting food seem to be pretty minimal. I did like how she sort of reverted back to thinking about her Starfleet training here.
Me too. I thought that was nice, go back to basics.
Yes. Which is something we don't often see Starfleet people do, but I thought that was very realistic in that situation.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember very vividly Janeway saying the exact same thing to her crew when they were all stranded on the planet. I don't remember which episode specifically, but she said the exact same thing, we need...
That would be Basics Part 1 and 2, the two-parter that ended the Kazon stuff. killed Seska as well.
I really enjoyed those episodes, and I remember Janeway saying, first things first, we need, water, food, shelter, so let's get cracking, and that's exactly what Erica says here, so I thought that was nice, survivalist basics there.
We have a brief scene back on the Enterprise where we're informed about the mission to deliver vaccines to another planet, so that the Enterprise is basically on a timer here to look for Ortegas' shuttle. On the moon, Ortegas then discovers that the moon has an irregular orbit around its gas giant, and that eventually the moon is going to pass through the atmosphere of the gas giant, and that's basically going to be bad news for her. It's a pretty toxic gas giant. Most gas giants are. One slight nitpick is that when it comes to a gas giant, it's not necessarily the gases that's the problem, it's also the pressure.
And the heat typically involved with that.
The heat and the pressure is generally is huge with them. So choking to death is the least of her worries.
But in this case, that's the thing we focus on, which is fine. I guess they did kind of skirt around that by saying you're just going to be skirting the edge of the thermosphere. So it's like, maybe, I'm not sure if the science checks out on it, but maybe in that case it would just be the gases that are the real problem. But, anyways, not a huge deal.
But she discovers what looks like another crashed ship in the distance, so inferring she's not alone. We then have another scene on the Enterprise, and basically this is how the episode plays out from here on. We get scenes with Ortegas on the moon, and then on the Enterprise it's an Uhura focused subplot, as Uhura is basically pressuring the rest of the bridge crew to keep on looking for Ortegas. She's found Ortegas' original Mayday, but it's unclear whether it's, completely accurate or whether it's just a reflection. Pike eventually accepts Uhura arguing the case to stay and keep on working on the problem, even though it seems clear that the rest of the crew are sort of... There is some pushback to risking the colonists' lives, from Una especially.
Which I actually really enjoyed in this episode. I really like that we got a kind of balance of opinions here, where you have Uhura who's taking a very emotional stance on the thing. She's like, this is my friend, this is our crew member, we need to stay and find her. And then you have Una being more practical and quite literally saying, the lives of the many are a bit more important here, and this whole plan you're concocting is very theoretical and in many cases very dangerous. So it's not really a practical thing for us to stay and keep looking. And I really liked that there was pushback against Uhura in this situation. And I also like that ultimately Captain Pike takes, I would say, a fairly level-headed but compassionate approach to it. He's not completely callous to it, but he is like, you do need to show me some evidence that we can do this, but I am going to give you the time to do that because I also want to find Erica. Like, again, I felt like he was being a good leader, Una was being a good leader, and Uhura was being a good friend. So I liked the dynamic of everything going on the Enterprise.
So we do also have a little bit of interesting name drop here for Star Trek lore purposes. The USS Constellation, captained by Captain Decker, is mentioned. This will be laterly seen in the original series, where they encounter the Doomsday Machine and the Constellation is destroyed by it, Decker going nuts and almost destroying the Enterprise in the process. But we get him and the ship name dropped here as also being part of the relief efforts for this planetary virus. Back on the moon, then, Ortegas discovers that yes, there is someone else living with her, and she discovers it's a gorn. Which, when I think it's fair, when we both saw it, this episode has now become more interesting. I mean, I was immediately reminded of the Next Generation episode with Geordie and the Romulan being stuck on that.
And that's the first thing I thought of as well. I was like, okay, so we're doing that, which I will say, I do feel like this falls into the trope of Strange New Worlds, in some cases playing it a little safe and not doing new things. It's sort of like, yeah, we've already kind of seen this done on Star Trek before, but it's a good trope at least. Like, it's a good story to have. I really like the whole enemies to friends because we're in this survivalist situation kind of storyline. So, which I'll admit, it's a little predictable. Like, as soon as I saw the Gorn, I was kind of like, I'm pretty sure that's where we're going with this. And it is. And,
yes, it was a shame that this episode not only sort of rips on, to use an example, that TNG episode, but then actually it turns out to be ripping on a totally different episode at the same time, which again I have some very strong opinions of, but without we'll wait till we actually get to the big reveal at the end of the episode to talk about that. I did like how when she discovers the initial settlement that there's been an attempt to make this Gorn's home
cozy.
Yeah, like there was an attempt to put artifacts and things, and there was, artistic work or stuff that looked like artwork on the walls and stuff.
A semblance of culture here, rather than the Gorn just being portrayed as a monster as they've done on the show for so long.
Exactly, that is exactly it. They gave the Gorn culture here, as opposed to just, horrible, fleshy, Mass Effect style grossness. Back on the Enterprise, we have another scene of Uhura discussing the plan to use. Basically, she's got various plans to try to find Ortegas, but it's clear she's kind of clutching at straws a bit, and I think everyone in the room kind of knows that. Una is really pushing Pike to basically say that we need to leave, which I think is fair. But like you said earlier, like Pike takes quite a level approach to it, gives Uhura a few more hours. I think this is sort of like the first time we've seen Uhura being more, I want to use the word authoritative, but that might not be the right word, but she's
taking a stance.
Taking a stance, which is something she will at least do a few times in the future in the original series and in the original films. But yeah, this, in Strange New Worlds at least, this seems to be like the first. I mean, maybe the musical episode was the first time, but this, she feels a bit more desperate here and a bit more passionate, I suppose.
Well, yeah, she's pushing against what everyone else is saying is a bad idea, and she's like, "No, I'm telling you, this can work. Just let me do this." Whereas the musical episode was sort of like she just happens to come up with the solution to it, but she's not receiving pushback in that particular case. This is maybe the first time where she's like, "No, I don't care if you all think I'm wrong. I'm going to push this because this is my friend, and I am going to find a way to make this work."
Back on the moon, we then go through a series of fairly predictable events. Ortegas thinks she's being attacked by the Gorn, but it turns out the Gorn is saving her from a giant alien centipede thing, and I know Michael hates centipedes.
Yeah, I did not like those things at all. As soon as I saw that it looked like a centipede, I was like, get that shit away from me.
The Gorn rescues her from that, but while the Gorn is butchering the animal, Ortegas notices that the Gorn is injured itself. The Gorn shares food with Ortegas. She eats it. It's a...
disgusting. It's disgusting.
But it also massively reminded me of the scene in How to Train Your Dragon, where Toothless spews up the lump of fish and gives it to Hiccup and expects her to eat it, and he does the same. This is nice, but it's really not. It's horrible.
I mean, yeah, definitely similar vibes. I just kind of adore that this is finally like what I've been begging from the show to do, which is to like somewhat humanize the Gorn and not have them just be monsters. like, this is a Gorn that is showing compassion and reason because they're in a survivalist situation, and doing it alone clearly isn't working out for this Gorn. So she's, accepting Ortegas as a friend in this particular moment. And again, I have been begging this show to do that for so long. So it was really nice to finally see it happen.
I agree, but I think that might be one of the reasons why I'm not fond of this episode. I think there are some problems with it at the end, especially.
Well, again, that's why I don't like the ending, but
I feel like this episode should have happened
way sooner. Way sooner. 100%.
Especially considering the two most recent episodes, which were quite poor, and then the gimmick episode of the holodeck as well. I do kind of feel that this is the sort of episode that we should have had, because it's like, at the very beginning of the episode, they do the flashback of Ortegas having PTSD and all that, and it's like, yeah, but we already know that stopped being an issue when this season got bored of that being a problem. We've already had multiple episodes since then where you haven't even talked about it. It's kind of like the episode is trying to be like, think about back at the beginning, like, ignore all the other episodes we've done. We're actually going to focus on Ortegas and the Gorn and the PTSD stuff again. It's like,
well, I was more thinking, like, yes, it probably should have been earlier in the season, but I meant earlier in the show. Like,
right.
This should have been like a season 2 episode, where season 1 you wanted portray them as just monsters. Sure, I wasn't a fan of it then, but if it's for the purpose of, get the audience kind of in the same headspace as the characters, thinking like, oh, these are like evil creatures, and then in season 2 you kind of flip the script and you're like, actually, take a look, this is clearly a person. I think that would have been better than making us wait until the very end of season 3 to finally show that the Gorn can be capable of more than just being horrific monsters.
While the Gorn is sleeping, Ortegas discovers that the Gorn has a working, or at least has the bits of a communications array, so she steals it. But on her way back to her shuttlecraft, rather coincidentally and conveniently, her shuttle falls through the moon, leaving her basically stuck and having to return back to the Gorn, who then has to rescue her again from the same murderous centipede things, and protects her with a Halo-style bubble shield.
Which I gotta say, just as a side note, really, I feel like this season as a whole has been very, like, budget friendly without doing too many, like, big special effects, which I'm fine with. But this episode, I feel like they dished out a little bit more money towards it, because there were a lot of really impressive, like, visual effects shots in this episode in particular. So
the gas giant was pretty cool.
Yeah, I was like, I thought in general the aesthetic and visuals of this episode were actually quite good, and bubble shield included.
This was also the point of the episode where I thought that something else was going on, because it was way too convenient for all of these things to have happened in this way. It was almost like she was being punished for stealing the communications array. Back on the Enterprise, Uhura comes up with a plan to use the Enterprise itself to wedge the wormhole open and use that to look for Ortegas. The plan is not perfect though, and in fact Uhura has to lie about the results directly to Pike, which there is a strange oddity here about any officer being able to manually alter the results of a test just by typing in whatever number they wanted.
It does seem like that's probably not good to have that.
Yeah, there's
possible.
Not a feature you would. No, there's no reason as to why you would have that unless you're wanting people to fudge results, which is not a sort of, that's open to corruption. So
yeah, but I did like that moment where Uhura, again, just being really focused on the more emotional side of things, is like, yeah, I'm gonna fudge these numbers so that Pike says yes to it. And I also really like the reveal later on about that with Pike.
Yeah, Pike is fully aware that she's lied here and latterly reveals that. Which kind of shows that Pike is also not being a dick in this situation. He's also pushed it and pushed it and pushed it as much as he can.
I mean, I'm sure like most captains, he's like, I'm not going to leave a crew member behind if I can help it.
Back on the moon, we have potentially the most interesting set of scenes, I think, of this particular episode. Ortegas eventually decides to work with the Gorn, and they go through a series of, like, I want to call them bonding exercises. She offers to help the Gorn with putting something medicinal onto its injury. The Gorn provides her with more food. And then they start this sort of primitive communication with one another. Ortegas discovers that the Gorn is a pilot like her, and she creates a primitive universal translator with her tricorder. It's revealed that the Gorn fully understands English and then can respond through to tricorder giving yes or no answers. So it's not typical Star Trek completely perfect communication, but it is better than nothing.
I like that it's also not perfect communication as well. It makes their scenes a little more interesting together, and two, it allows me to believe it a bit more as well, because if Ortegas, who is, a helmsman, is able to create out of thin air basically a perfect universal translator, I would have called a little bullshit on that, but the fact that it is a very rudimentary, just agree, disagree answer set, I can buy it. And it simultaneously made me a little impressed with Ortega. So I was like, look at you go. You got a few tricks up your sleeve.
There's a few instances in this episode of her demonstrating her mechanical capabilities, which I thought was some nice character development. They play chess together, or at least Ortegas teaches this female Gorn chess.
And gets her ass beat, apparently.
And the female Gorn teaches Ortegas a game in return, which seems similar in some way.
Which again, I like, because it's nice to see other cultures' games and bits of their culture represented, even if they don't go into the specifics of how it's played, because it's not really too important.
No.
But it's nice that they made an effort there to be like, well, the Gorn has their own, set of games that they play with each other, and it was a nice little touch.
Ortegas eventually repairs the communications array, but the Gorn seems hesitant to be rescued, and eventually, through their primitive communication, the Gorn reveals that she understands that she's so badly injured that she would be killed because she's too injured to be useful, matching the sort of behavior we've seen of other Gorn in this show, that if you're too weak to survive, you are destroyed. Which Ortegas does not agree with at all. She's, from this point on, very passionate in getting them both off the planet alive.
Which, again, I feel like it was a nice moment for Ortegas as a character. It made me like her a lot more. I was just like, you know what? Even with your trauma, you're able to get past it and see this Gorn as your friend, which, again, it made me like Ortegas more than I did before, so kudos.
On the Enterprise, there's a brief scene where Pike takes the helm, flies the ship into the wormhole, wedges it there, and they start looking for Ortegas.
Also, a brief side note, kind of nice to see the shield be represented as a classic bubble like it was in
the bubble.
All the Legacy series and everything, because that's something they don't really do very often in newer Star Trek. They're like, oh, the shield is like skin tight, it hugs the ship perfectly, which I think is a cool look too, but it was nice to see it like as a full bubble again. I was like, oh cool.
Well, this was the warp field bubble, not the shield bubble.
Which still, it's nice to see it.
It's nice to see the warfield bubble, yes. On the moon, things go badly again. Ortegas is attacked by the centipede things again, only this time when she uses a flare to defend herself, it causes a massive explosion that knocks out the protective shielding that the Gorn was using and the comms array to keep them alive. So they're basically in a situation where death is imminent, but that gives Ortegas an idea to ignite the planets, to ignite the gases of the gas giant as they pass through it, as a way of attracting attention the Enterprise to beam them up, which is certainly a risky solution. Set fire to your entire planet to to attract attention.
But I mean, hey, they were out of options, so I respect the can-do attitude that Ortega's had right there. She's like, this is all we got, so let's try it.
The Gorn hesitates but eventually decides to help, and they set up the explosion, which is seen by the Enterprise. Again, some nice CGI seeing the explosion going down.
I would agree. Again, not like stellar to the point where I'm like, wow, I've never seen effects so good, but it was very solid VFX. I thought it was a neat visual image.
The Enterprise picks it up, and this is where the episode went from. This had the potential to be, if not the best episode of the season, the second best so far.
Agreed.
This is where they then fumble it entirely for various reasons. So
starting with La'an.
So the Enterprise away team beams down, discovers Ortegas and said Gorn, and La'an instantly guns the Gorn down without any. The Gorn isn't armed, it's not threatening behavior, it's just instantaneous gunning the thing down. And
I have a lot of issues with this personally. I feel like it's really anti-Star Trek ideology here. Like, you're telling me a Starfleet officer, even with former trauma with the Gorn, immediately sets phasers to kill and just shoots, no questions asked, no attempt at communication,
with a fellow officer literally in the way as well, so you could have ended up hitting your fellow officer.
And like, since when do we automatically have the phasers set to kill? Wouldn't they have had it set to stun at least?
Yeah.
Like, I really dislike that choice. And on one hand, I guess it makes sense for La'an, who does have all that trauma as a child with the Gorn, to be like very eager to like jump to violence in this situation. But again, had they stunned the Gorn, I would have been like, you know what? Fair enough. It makes sense for the character, and we can actually do something with this new Gorn character in the future. But the fact that all 4 officers immediately just kill her, I was like, what the fuck? Like, I'm putting that in my report, Lon. I'm definitely reporting your ass for that, because that was not cool.
Thinking back to that TNG episode, Geordi and the Romulan beam onto the bridge of the Enterprise. Worf pulls out his phaser, but Picard tells him to hold his fire, and then Picard welcomes the Romulan survivor onto the bridge. Similar sort of situation, but one is handled
a lot better.
One is handled in the way I would expect Starfleet officers to handle, but also people with weapons. There are, in military terms anyway, rules of engagement. You don't open fire unless specific circumstances warrant you opening fire. And in this situation, La'an knows nothing about what's happened, only that the officer they're looking for also happens to be here with a Gorn. And in the context of the situation, it's very clear that this is not the Gorn is a threat. This is the officer we're looking for has survived a serious situation and happens to be with a Gorn. So maybe we should ask some questions. But no, she decides to open fire first. It's completely irregular. And then, if that wasn't bad enough, time stops and we have the primary reveal of this episode, in that this is yet another instance of Strange New Worlds being unable to say anything for itself without stealing something from somewhere else. In this case, this is the original series episode with the Metreons again. Now, if you don't know what happened the last time, these are the people that set up the fight between Kirk and the Gorn in the first place on Cestus 3.
Which apparently they like to do more than once. They've done it twice now.
This episode is a clumsy prequel explanation for that episode taking place, when it's made clear that the Metreon did this experiment with Ortegas and the female Gorn to see how the humans would react. Then there is this clumsy, you're not going to remember, we're going to delete memories, most people won't remember what happened. happened here, and there's a line about resetting their perceptions of the Gorn, which again I feel is a clumsy attempt to explain the very significant differences between the TOS, or Legacy Gorn as we shall call them, and these discount xenomorphs that Strange New World have created.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what that line means, to be perfectly honest. I feel like you could interpret it like a couple different ways.
Yes.
And, like, on one hand, it could be their explanation of why does the Gorn look like a guy in a suit in the original series, as opposed to what they look like here. It could also mean
the Metreons are interfering.
Or it could also just mean, like, any, recollection of the Gorn will be wiped from human memory, which is why Kirk and the rest of them act like they've never heard of them before. I don't know. I feel like there's a couple ways you could interpret it, but no matter which way you interpret it, it is kind of a clumsy, like, hey, this is why the things in the original series were this way, when I'm like, you don't need to do that. Like, again, that's why I dislike the Klingon explanation.
It added nothing to this episode. You could get rid of the Metreon bit, and the episode was fine. In fact, the episode is almost better without it, because then you have the perfect setup of Ortegas and La'an having some conversation about what happened, or just moving the episode onto the ending sequences, which is a perfectly good conversation. The addition of the Metreon bit here adds nothing, and then turns this formulaic but interesting episode into a clumsy attempt to rip off the original series episode, which is very disappointing.
Again, I was also thinking, like, this might be my favorite episode of this season as we were going through it. I'm like, we finally have the Gorn being represented as something other than monsters. We finally get an Ortegas episode. We finally get to see Uhura stand up for herself. We finally get to see some, again, as you said, like, formulaic. It's kind of been there, done that storyline, but it's a good one, and it was executed well too. It's not like, oh, here's something that's been done in Star Trek but done better before. I'm like, it was done perfectly well here, until you throw in the Metreon, and it's like, but why? Like, you were doing so good. Why did you fuck it up like that right at the end? Now I can definitively say my favorite episode is definitely the 5th one with the reveal of the Vesda, but this was definitely in the running to take that episode down a peg until we got to this point, and it just really frustrates me. I'm like, you had something good, and then you just fucked it up.
And I'm not even sure why it was necessary.
I think it was more just them saying, oh, the people who do remember that original series episode are gonna lose their minds at how cool it is that we've introduced that here again. And I'm like, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure we are not going to be alone in the fact that that is a pretty lame reveal. I mean, maybe not. Again, there were a lot of people who actually really enjoyed the What is Starfleet episode, and I absolutely hated it. I don't know. I feel like it was just them thinking this is going to be good nostalgia bait, and I just really dislike the use of nostalgia bait in general nowadays, because it's so overly used,
especially,
and it's not even done well here.
The whole of season 3 of Picard was all entirely nostalgia bait. I mean, but after that scene, which ruined the whole episode, the ending scene is this nice conversation between Uhura and Ortegas talking about what happened, and Ortegas is uncertain how to reconcile the events that she witnessed, and Uhura kind of helps by explaining that, Ortegas should remember the female Gorn and what happened, and she can still be friends with La'an. And the camera pans out to reveal that she's keeping one of the Gorn chess pieces in her quarters as a sort of remembrance of that incident, which I thought it was an okay way to end the episode, but again, I feel that it too easily skimmed over what happened.
Yeah, I think I would have preferred the ending of the episode be a conversation between La'an and Ortegas, where potentially Ortegas says, like, look, you're my friend, but I don't know how to, like, forgive you for that, and potentially set up a storyline about the two of them reconciling over what happened. I mean, maybe we'll get something like that in a future episode, and get into that later on, but I feel like it would have made a better bookmark ending to this particular episode, because I thought it was kind of weird that Lon is basically not in the episode until she kills the Gorn, and then she's not any part of the ending either. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, all right then. I don't know. It just frustrates me, because this really did have the potential to be at least one of the better episodes of this season, and then it really fumbled it at the end. So, like, out of 10, I would probably give the episode like a 6, whereas it would have been closer to an 8 or a 9 otherwise without that ending.
And I feel like this is kind of a hallmark of this season of Strange New Worlds. It's you've had interesting ideas, but you just handle them clumsily, or you fumble it at a specific point with just the wrong idea. And I don't. This season's was written during that writer's strike, or around the time of the big writer's strike, and I don't know whether Jesse Gender suggested that might be an explanation for some of the roughness of previous episodes, but I don't know, it just seems like so many episodes this season have just been, that would have been good if you had just spent a little bit more time writing the episode draft.
Yeah, just refine it a little bit more. I mean, some episodes I don't think really could be saved. Like, I personally think last week's episode, with 4.5 Vulcans, I'm like, I probably would have just scrapped that episode. I don't think you can save that one.
No.
But the What is Starfleet episode is another episode like this one, where I'm like, you had the potential for that to be one of the coolest episodes of this entire series, and then you did something kind of towards the end of the episode that just completely nosedived it. And again, a little more refinement on the script, I think, could have drastically improved both of these episodes. But let us know your thoughts and feelings about this episode down below. I'm very curious to see how other people react to this one, specifically the ending. Like, maybe there are other people who did enjoy the reveal, or how La'an handled the situation. I would definitely like to hear some of your thoughts and opinions on this.
And also let us know if you prefer our new sort of method of going through the episode and talking about the stuff we want to talk about at the same time, rather than splitting the review and the recap into, because you let us know if you prefer that style. But until next time, it's goodbye from me,
and goodbye from me.